We are back here today to talk about those two-step word problems. Again, our format today is going to look very, very similar up until the very end of the assignment on what we did yesterday. Okay, again, type in your name and the date on here. And then this is that Operation Clue word picture that you guys can reference back to today. Again, I'm going to walk through this example problem, this first one, and then I'm going to do an example problem with an example at the very end of the assignment so you can kind of see how to do that. Okay, again, Google Read and Write will not work on this assignment, so I have gone through and recorded myself reading all of the problems. You just have to click on this audio button up here in the top left corner. Okay, so this is problem number 6 on the assignment, and it says that Ella took 67 photos for the yearbook and that Angelo took 59 photos for the yearbook. If there were 432 photos in the yearbook, how many photos did the other students take? Okay, so the first step again is figuring out what my 2 steps need to be. Okay, so my options are calculate how many photos Ella, Angelo, and all the other students took in all. Well, I don't really need to have that step because I know how many there were total. So I don't need to go through and figure out how many they took. Calculate how many more photos Ella took than Angelo. I don't really need to do that either because it tells me how many they took. Ella took 67 and Angelo took 59. Calculate how many of the yearbook photos Ella and Angelo did not take. I do need to do that, but there's a step I have to do before that, and that is calculate the number of photos that Ella and Angelo took together. Okay, so I'm going to move that one up to, and I'm going to have to scroll up, move it up to step number 1. And then, like I said earlier, I need to figure out how many of those photos they didn't take. Okay, so I have my 2 steps. So now I'm going to move on to slide number 2. Okay, so remember yesterday's assignment, you were going through and you were making the equation. Today, they gave you the equation. All you have to do is move this circle on the right letter. Okay, so it's asking you, what equation can you use to find the number of photos that Ella and Angelo took? Okay, so remember, Ella took 67 and Angelo took 59. So all together, we need to add those 2 numbers. So I'm going to drag that circle and put it around letter A. Okay, so I need to add 67 and 59. And P is the number of photos that they took. Because remember, we don't know that answer quite yet. Okay, but when we go through and add those 2 numbers, we get 126. So altogether, Ella and Angelo took 126 photos. Okay, but we're not done. Because remember, we're trying to figure out how many photos the other students took. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to move down to the 3rd slide. Okay, and remember, there were 432 photos in the yearbook. So now we're trying to figure out what equation we can use to find the number of photos that the other students took. Okay, so I'm going to start off with using my 432, and I'm going to subtract how many photos that Ella and Angelo took. And so I see that 432 minus 126 is going to give us the number of photos that the other students took. So I remember I moved that circle around letter B. Okay, and when I go through and I subtract those two numbers, I get 306. Okay, so the other students at the school took 306 photos. Okay, so again, it's very similar to what we did yesterday with these, where you're dragging and putting the steps in order, and then you are solving the problems. The format of the equations just look a little bit different today. I do want to go over, though, the last couple problems because these are going to look a little bit different, okay? The format is a little bit different. You still have two steps. They are just in this format. So again, I went through, because Google Read and Write will not work, put audio where you can listen to the question. This audio over here goes with this question, and this audio over in the top right corner goes with the second question. Okay, so I'm going to do an example problem of one that looks like this, but I do want to go over it very, very quickly. You do have, this is your last two questions. Again, the audio is in the top left corner or the top right corner, depending on what question you're working on. And then you are simply just writing the equations yourself. Okay? But I do want to go through and do an example problem. Okay? So this one is telling us that Jackson practices piano 4 times a week. He practices for 40 minutes each time. And it wants to know how many minutes does Jackson practice in 2 weeks? Okay, so the very first thing we need to do is we need to know how many minutes does Jackson practice in 1 week? Okay, so I know he practices 4 times a week and that he practices for 40 minutes each time. And if you remember right, that each tells me I'm going to either multiply or divide. Okay, but I see that word times in there, so I know I'm going to multiply. So I'm going to do 40 times 4, and when I multiply those two numbers together, I'm going to get, and you can't type into this box, you have to drag the correct answer from down here. So I know that he spends 160 minutes a week practicing. And then, the second question is how many minutes does Jackson practice in 2 weeks? So I simply just need to take this 160 that I got for the first problem and multiply it by 2. Okay, so when I multiply, goodness, I keep going to the next slide. When I multiply that by 2, I get 320 minutes. Okay, so you are going to continue working. You're going to solve this next one right here and try to finish up with the last 2 slides if possible. Remember, I am on Zoom today. If you need help, okay, just let me know. Hop back on there and ask questions if you have them.